We are 1 week away from the NHL trade deadline. Today's video, we're taking a look at the latest NHL trade rumors concerning teams like the Avalanche, the Maple Leafs, the Penguins, the Ducks, and more. Plus, Auston Matthews of the Leafs has been suspended. We have some key, significant injury updates and more. All that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. First up, let's talk about the Auston Matthews suspension. And in the outdoor game, the Heritage Classic, featuring the Maple Leafs and the Sabres, the Leafs had another, I guess you could call it a bit of a meltdown. Unfortunately lost 5-2 to the Sabres. Certainly frustration appears to be building within Auston Matthews and some of the other Maple Leaf players. I know there was a couple of sequences there where there was a hit on Matthews earlier that apparently, I know Michael Bunting responded, which to me was not really a big deal. It was just a normal hit. Wasn't even anything heavy or dirty or anything of that nature. Then he ended up getting into it with Rasmus Dahlin, and essentially he came back with a cross-check right to the neck of Dahlin. His argument was that he tried to aim more for the upper part of the shoulder area, and it kind of rode up and got him in the neck. I don't see it that way at all. To me, you could see as he kind of leaps forward and kind of lunges at Dahlin, like he was making sure he was high enough to get him up in the neck head area. And you could tell how angry and frustrated he was. It was a retaliation. To me, it's 100% a suspendable play. There's no question in my mind. He's been given 2 games by NHL player safety. No history. I thought maybe he would get 1. I'm okay with 2. I know there's a lot of people calling to throw the book at him. I think, honestly, some people just like to make outlandish predictions and things just to kind of get the Leaf fan base riled up, which sometimes is easy to do. It's understandably so. The Leaf fan base is huge, and there's lots of them out there. They're probably the largest hockey fan base going. And I understand their need and desire to defend their players. But I will say this about the play. It was a dirty play. Unnecessary, not needed, suspendable 100%. But I will give Matthews some credit in this case, because here's the thing. For a lot of his career, he really hasn't been known as the kind of guy who's been kind of willing to fight back. Look back to last year's Stanley Cup playoffs in the Montreal Canadiens Toronto Maple Leaf series, where we saw Matthews in behind the Habs net in a big melee with Habs players. I can't remember which defenseman it was. I want to say maybe Ben Sherratt had him all tangled up and kind of his arms around him, and Matthews is laughing and looking at the referee to do something, but he wouldn't give in at all. I'd rather see this version of Auston Matthews, who's willing to defend himself, willing to fight back, and show some more raw emotion. So to me, I'd rather see that Matthews than the way he reacted to getting mobbed in last year's playoffs against Montreal. So to me, suspendable 100%, but it's nice to see him kind of show a different side of himself and kind of fight back a little bit. And hopefully he doesn't let up. We don't want to see him cross the line and obviously be suspended all the time. But it's a nice way to see some more emotion. Now, some pretty significant injury updates today on a variety of players, which is going to impact the trade deadline as well. I'll start with Dallas. We get word today that goaltender Anton Khudobin is going to be having hip surgery. Hip surgery is a big recovery for goalies. Quite often can be career-ending. Look what happened to Tuukka Rask. At Khudobin's age, there would not be shocking if he doesn't play anymore, or if he does, if it's a struggle. He's got 1 more year in his contract with Dallas. I don't know if he's going to be able to play next year or not. It's really debatable at this point. So that's essentially going to take Braden Holtby off the trade market. They're not going to be able to go with just Jake Ottinger. I mean, they started the year with Bishop, Khudobin, Holtby, and Ottinger, and they're down to 2 now, with Bishop essentially ending his career, unable to make the comeback, and now Khudobin going down with a big hip surgery. That's kind of makes an impact there. Of course, Dallas is also likely keeping John Klingberg due to the illness to Miro Heiskanen with mononucleosis. He's going to be out for, hard to say, 4, 6, 8 weeks. You don't know. Mono can be very hard to predict. I've seen it hit people in different ways, and he could possibly be out the rest of the year. It's not a guarantee, but it is possible. He could be back in a couple of weeks. It's a really difficult illness to predict and project on exactly how it's going to, everybody's going to recover. So some big updates there. So we're likely not going to see a Klingberg trade. We're likely not going to see a Holtby trade. Now, the LA Kings also got some significant injury news. Dustin Brown could be done for the season as well. He suffered an upper body injury. No real timeline as of yet, but probably looking at least a month, so he could be done. Matt Roy on defense, also out for, we don't know the exact timeline yet, but it could be significant with a lower body injury. So a couple of bad blows there in LA. And Jacob Chychrun, Arizona, one of the most talked about defensemen in the trade market for the last several months here, got hurt against the Bruins on Saturday, and they just revealed after an MRI here just in a short time ago, he's looking at 2 to 4 weeks. So we're a week away from the trade deadline. If he's only going to be out 2 weeks, I could still see a trade maybe happening. Clearly, the teams that are interested in having trade dialogue with the Coyotes are likely going to want to get some more medical information, probably see some records that way to kind of clarify where things are at. But this is the reason why the Coyotes, I think, decided to trade Chychrun instead of trying to help build around him and be the big cornerstone, is as much as he's a good player, he does get hurt a lot, and it is a concern going forward. The guy's gone through a lot of injuries in his young career so far, and you have to wonder if that's going to maybe shorten it or take a bite out of the amount of time he's going to be able to play in the NHL. So that is certainly a big concern for a lot of other teams. So will that impact a Chychrun trade? From an entertainment standpoint, from a fan perspective, it's not great to see all these names possibly come off the trade market, but every year there's always a handful of deals that we probably never seen coming. That wasn't really mentioned by NHL reporters or in anything that came up in the rumor mill. So we'll see where that goes, but all pretty significant stuff there that could have an impact. A couple of things we want to talk about here as well. We could see a trade between Montreal and Minnesota. Elliotte Friedman on the Jeff Merrick show, and this is not the first time it's come up either. It's come up in other segments with other reporters too. Talking about Jack McBain, one of the top NCAA players, draft pick of the Wild that's unlikely to sign. It's believed the Wild are going to trade him before the deadline, and he will sign when the season wraps up with Boston College, with wherever he ends up. That's at least what's likely going to happen. I'm sure that teams are going to be probably granted consent to talk to him and his representatives before making a deal, but Montreal appears to be one of the most likely landing spots. There is some talk that maybe Arizona could get involved there as well, where they need players and certainly want a young player like that. They'd be interested to continue with their rebuild. But Montreal appears to be the front runner. I'm not sure exactly what kind of return, but the Habs do have a ton of draft currency, so we're probably looking at a second or third round pick or something to that effect. But Jack McBain very well could become a Montreal Canadien here in the near future. Like I said, they also have Jordan Harris, a Northeastern, that they're hoping to sign when his season wraps up. So there could be a couple of big additions there in Montreal if they complete that deal and get McBain and Harris within their organization and officially in the pro side of hockey here in the next few weeks here before the end of the regular season. They might even be able to get a few games in as well to kind of get an audition for next year. Now, as we talked about here, of course, we had a big trade earlier with Josh Manson of the Ducks being traded from the Anaheim Ducks to the Colorado Avalanche, and the Avalanche are likely not done. We've heard over the last few days here, as we've heard about the Jerard and Landeskog injuries, likely going on long-term injury reserve. When those injuries were confirmed and announced by the team, they said a minimum of 4 weeks. Well, there's only about 6 weeks or so left in the regular season, so there's a pretty good chance that it plays out that way. Elliotte Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast that came out today, which actually was a milestone episode, number 300. So let's certainly want to congratulate Merrick and Friedman and their producer, Arnold on some great work there. 300 episodes is a great milestone to achieve, and certainly something I rely on heavily for my news and rumors that I obviously used to talk about here on my channel. So certainly, Friedman talked about the fact that he feels that the Avalanche probably planned this out. They've probably known for some time that Landeskog's had a knee problem that he's likely going to need surgery on. If the circumstances were different, he might try to play through it and have this done in the offseason, but most people believe that he wouldn't be having the surgery now unless they were very, very confident that he would be able to come back and play for the playoffs. He's not going to do that and risk being out long term. It's probably not a serious knee problem, something that they're confident that he can bounce back from in about a month's time, or maybe 6 weeks at most. So obviously, putting him to the 6 week mark would put him around the beginning of the playoffs. Now, of course, same goes for Samuel Girard. Girard may not be out quite as long term, so he may be back, but still with Landeskog's salary, you throw $7-8 million bucks on LTIR. They got Josh Manson with 50% retained. They still would have $4 or $5 million to play with. So if they can get Philly to take half of the Giroux salary, that's all they'll need. They'll be able to make these deals without a third party, which a lot of people thought, as much as a couple of weeks ago, for the Avalanche to do the significant additions like this, that they'd have to pay more by involving a third party to essentially rent some cap space. That may not be the case now, but Friedman does believe that Giroux is likely going to pick up here when it comes to the Avs, and they've been around him as well as a few other teams. Jeff Merrick was reporting that things have been relatively quiet, but you get Giroux's 1,000th NHL game coming up here on Thursday with the Flyers, and then of course the deadline's the Monday after, so we're likely going to hear things probably heat up on the weekend, come right down to the wire would be my guess. Giroux recently did some interviews and talked about the fact of, about how this was a bad year in Philly and probably the worst one of his career from a team perspective, and he even talked about having discussions with them about the future. So even if he's traded, I wouldn't rule out the fact that he very well could go back and re-sign in the offseason if they can work something out. No guarantees, of course, but it seems like there might be mutual interest to do that. But look out for the Avalanche. They added Manson, and many feel now that Giroux is likely going to be next. They already traded Drew Helleson in the Manson trade. Now they have other prospects that the Flyers could be interested in as well. Helleson was one that was rumored to be being looked at by Philly, but they still have the defensemen like a Justin Barron. They've still got Ranta, Olofsson. They still have some more draft picks if need be. Like, I think Colorado is recognizing that they need to go for it this year. They're tops in the NHL. They've seen Vegas be their arch nemesis, who are weakened this year due to injury. Calgary very well could be the team that gives them the most trouble in the West. It's hard to say, but I think the Avalanche are going to be making a run here and trying to go for it. So don't be surprised if they make another huge addition here before the deadline. Now, when it comes to Pittsburgh and Vancouver, we talked about Brock Besser being a player that the Penguins have had an interest in, and a lot of this boils around the fact that Rutherford and Alvin in Vancouver are really trying to add a top young defenseman to their blue line, as we've talked about, and John Marino and Marcus Pettersson, both in Pittsburgh, are players that they're very familiar with and are very interested in possibly bringing to Vancouver for the right price if they can work out a deal. Friedman reports that the Canucks and Penguins are rumored to have several conversations, but just having a hard time kind of nailing down the pieces in the trade to make something work for both sides. Doesn't mean it's going to get done, but we know that the Penguins certainly have had interest in adding a forward. The Canucks have had interest in adding a D, so kind of makes sense, but at the same time, if you're Pittsburgh, do you really want to trade like a Marino right now before the playoffs? It's really hard to say. And you have to think, too, that part of this could be going into the offseason. They have some big question marks in Pittsburgh. Can they sign Letang? Can they sign Malkin? Can they sign Brian Rust? It's going to be really, really hard to sign all of these guys and keep everybody together if they want to. So making some cap casualties, you could say, is likely going to be necessary, but to me that's more of an offseason move, but we will see. But it's definitely 100% confirmed now that the Penguins and Canucks have had conversations. Besser appears to be one of the main guys interested in on the Vancouver side, but again, it very well may not even materialize because the discussions have been going on for some time. But a top young defenseman is Vancouver's top priority, while trying to find that flexibility. And they also think part of finding that cap flexibility is likely going to be to sign JT Miller. So it's hard to say who goes, but they'll likely continue discussing, see if they can find themselves a trade. The Anaheim Ducks, who we've talked about, were obviously busy with trading Josh Manson, appear to be the front runners to land Dominic Kubalik out of Chicago. He's another one of the players there on the Hawks roster, believed to be getting a fresh start, that they'd like to trade and get something in return for their rebuild. Kubalik's a former 30-goal guy. Really, there's a lot of good young talent in Anaheim. It's only going to continue to get deeper there as they make some of these deals, and you have to think that Kubalik could be a good fit there. I don't know what kind of return they'd be looking at. It probably wouldn't be anything too substantial, but they're probably looking at a prospect and a pick would be my guess. But look for Kubalik to be one of the members of the Hawks. I know Ryan Carpenter is another player that very well could go to a team like Nashville. There's been some talk about that. And then, of course, there's a lot of talk around Taves and Kane, but that's likely going to happen in the offseason with Marc-Andre Fleury being the big question mark here, which takes us to the next part here, which is Toronto. Of course, Friedman and Merrick on the 32 Thoughts podcast talked a lot about the Maple Leafs and the goaltending situation after seeing another meltdown at the Heritage Classic here. Peter Mrazek once again does not get the job done, and you have to think, even though Kyle Dubas was asked about it by Friedman himself during an interview at the Heritage Classic, if anything's changed when it comes to how they plan to handle the goaltending situation. He really doubled down on the fact that Peter Mrazek is a veteran guy of lots of NHL games, over 300 games in his career. It's not like he hasn't battled through times before where he had to improve his game, and he was able to find it and get it done. So they believe he can do it again. Of course, Campbell's out for a couple of weeks, but that's not really fooling anybody. A lot of people are convinced that they have no choice here but to analyze the goaltending market. But they're certainly looking at defense as well. There's no doubt. And I've seen Friedman and Dave Pagnotta both mention Hampus Lindholm being a prime target here for the Maple Leafs. I know they've had heavy interest in Josh Manson, but of course he's gone to Colorado now, and it's believed that he has obviously a number of teams on his modified no trade, and that Toronto was one of them. So Manson going to the Leafs was probably never going to happen, but they've been rumored to be interested in him for a couple of years, but they've also been rumored to be interested in Lindholm as of late. Obviously, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Anaheim Ducks have probably had numerous conversations as well around a variety of things. Obviously, the Ducks might be interested in maybe a guy like Travis Dermott or one of their other young prospect D. They have some interesting forwards. Maybe they were looking at Nick Robertson or first rounders. Hard to say, but there's certainly enough there that they could get a Lindholm deal done. Lindholm could very well shore up that left side, especially if Jake Muzzin is going to be out longer term. But it's going to take, obviously, a decent price tag to acquire him. Lindholm's probably going to be the defenseman that fetches the biggest price tag. They've also been linked to Habs Ben Sherratt, and which you don't hear as much about it. Every once in a while you hear Toronto and Sherratt, but they've obviously looked at a variety of defensemen here leading into this deadline. They're likely going to be trying to get somebody, but to me, can they address D and goaltending? I honestly don't know that they can. But if they go into the playoffs with Campbell and Mrazek, it's hard to have confidence in that right now based on how things are playing. But I mean, there's only a week to go before the deadline. If things change after the deadline and both goalies get playing better, then obviously things will change again with how people feel about it. But it's not going to give, I don't think, a lot of fans a lot of confidence the way things have been going here, because it's not like it's just a few games. Campbell has struggled mightily for the better part of 2 months, and now he's hurt. Mrazek hasn't really found his game recently at all either, so it's tough right now. And Dubas and Shanahan have some tough decisions to make, and you have to think that goaltending is on that list, even though the main rumors that are connected to them is defense. I mean, they need that too, but I'm seeing too many holes here that they may have a hard time plugging without enough cap space, which is going to give them an awfully tough first-round matchup. So we'll see where things go. Let me know your thoughts on all the news and rumors from today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.